In the year 991, on a tidal causeway near the River Blackwater in Essex, a Viking army was held back by a narrow strip of land. The English commander, a man named Bertnoth, could have kept them penned there. The water did the work for him. The raiders had to cross single file, and a handful of defenders could hold that crossing for as long as their arms lasted. The Vikings asked him to let them cross and fight on open ground. He agreed. He let them come over, and we don't fully know why. The poem written afterwards says he did so out of pride, that he gave up ground he did not have to give. Whatever the reason, the battle that followed went badly. Bertnoth was killed, and at the moment of his death, the men around him faced a simple choice that almost none of us will ever face. They could run, the woods were close, their lord was dead, the obligation that bound them to him was arguably dissolved the instant he fell, and no one would have been there to count who had slipped away into the trees. Several men did exactly that. They took Bertnoth's own horse and rode. But the ones who stayed knew they were going to die. They stayed anyway, and they stepped over the body of their dead lord to hold the line. One of them, an old retainer named Bertwald, said the words that the poet preserved. "Mind must be the harder, heart be the bolder, courage be the greater, as our might lessens." He was describing a fight he already knew was lost. To us, this looks like something gone wrong in the mind. We reach for words like brainwashing or fanaticism or a death cult because we cannot locate the part of a person that would make this trade willingly. A reasonable man protects his own life. These men had an exit and refused it, and the refusal looks less like courage than like a malfunction. That reading is comfortable, and it lets us off the hook because it means we have nothing to learn from them. They were simply broken in a way we are not. But I don't think that holds up. These were not unusual men, and they weren't stupid. These were farmers and householders who understood their own world with great clarity, and inside that world, what they did was the rational move. The cost of running was higher than the cost of dying, and they could see it plainly, even if we no longer can. To understand the decision, we have to understand the world they existed in. Three things ran together for these men in a way they no longer run together for us. Survival, money, and the soul were all bound to a single idea. That idea was honor. To see how honor physically kept a person alive, we have to first look at the ordinary men holding that line. The men who held that line were not professional soldiers in any sense we would recognize today. Most of them farmed. They had houses, fields, animals, and families a short walk from where they died. When the call came to fight, it came to people who had a great deal to lose and very little distance from the thing they were losing it for. This is the first piece of the world we have to take in. For most of people and most of history, the enemy came to your valley. He walked the same road you walked to the market, and at the end of it was your house. If the line of men in front of that house broke, the consequences were hard to fathom today. Your wife and children were killed or taken and sold. Your fields were burned. The word defense had no abstraction in it at all. You were defending the actual ground you were standing on and the actual people behind you. So when one of these men took his place in the shield wall, the decision was so much more than patriotic. He was risking his life so that the people directly behind the line would still be alive in the morning. And there was a bond that kept him there that was just as local. A shield wall works only if no one moves. Each man's shield covers part of the man beside him, so the line is one object made of many people, and it holds exactly as long as the people trust each other not to run. The man on your left was someone you'd known since childhood. To break and run was to open a gap in the wall at the shoulder of someone you might have shared a roof with. The loyalty was to the men you could reach out and touch. Now hold that against the other option. Suppose you ran and lived. You go home, and luckily the town has survived. The problem is that everyone knows. In a small agricultural community, there's nowhere to hide a fact like that. No anonymity to dissolve into. No fresh start one town over where they haven't heard. The man who broke the wall and survived came home to a place that had no further use for him. And in that world, the judgment of the community was the infrastructure of survival itself. There was no state to feed you, no market that would deal with a man no one trusted, no family that would marry a daughter to a coward. The loan of an ox in a bad season ran on reputation. Lose that and you were cut off from the machinery that kept a person alive through a winter. A disgraced life in a world bent slowly towards starvation. The Norse said this more bluntly than anyone. Cattle die, kinsmen die, the self must also die, but glory never dies for the man who is able to achieve it. Look at what sits next to what in that line. Glory and cattle, in the same breath, weighed on the same scale. To us, those belong to two different categories entirely, one of them a poetic abstraction and the other a farm animal. But to the people who made that poem, they were the same kind of thing. Cattle were wealth that could die in a hard winter. A name was wealth that could not. Your reputation survived you and kept feeding your family after the cold took everything that breathed. A man who spent his life building that name was making the most practical investment available to him. We have trouble feeling the weight of this because nothing in our own lives works the way it worked in theirs. We could lose the good opinion of everyone within walking distance and go on eating and sleeping indoors without interruption. The link between reputation and staying alive was the central fact of their existence. This brutal link between reputation and survival didn't stop with the farmers in the mud. It scaled all the way up to the men who commanded them. The warrior aristocracy lived by honor in a more concentrated form, and for them the word meant something with real mass to it. Honor functioned as a kind of currency, a reputation for courage converted directly into lands, into titles, into marriages that tied your blood to other powerful blood. Bravery was the thing you spent to buy a future for your line. Cowardice ran the other way, and it could strip a family of holdings that had taken generations to assemble. The shame of one man fell on his sons and their sons after them. A name carried value the way a coin did, and like a coin it could be earned, hoarded, or destroyed. We tend to imagine these men bound by some unbreakable code, an ancient and rigid system of rules they followed to the letter. The real picture is messier and more human. The tale of Heike, the Japanese war epic, shows warriors making constant calculations of reputation and advantage, switching sides, weighing what loyalty would cost against what it would buy. The famous codes came later. Bushido as a fixed written doctrine belongs to the long peace that followed the wars, when men who no longer fought sat down to romanticize the men who had. The fighters themselves spoke about death in flat working terms. Listen to Kato Kiyomasa, a real samurai and warlord of the Sengoku period, writing for his own retainers around 1590. Having been born into the house of a warrior, one's intentions should be to grasp the long and the short swords and to die. He says it again elsewhere just as plainly. If a man does not investigate into the matter of Bushido daily, it will be difficult for him to die a brave and manly death. Thus, it is essential to engrave this business of the warrior into one's mind well. He's describing a job. The work of a warrior is to die well, and a man who wants to do that work properly has to practice the thought of it every day, the way any difficult skill needs daily attention. There's no glow on it. A good death was a professional requirement, and Kiyomasa treated it the way a master craftsman treats the standard of his trade. The incentives ran on more than reputation though. They ran on fear, and the most immediate fear a soldier felt came from behind him rather than in front. His own commanders could do worse to him than the enemy could. Rome built this into doctrine. When a unit broke in cowardice, the army could answer with decimation. The cohort was divided into groups of 10, lots were drawn, and the one man who drew the short lot was beaten to death by the other 9, by the men he had just stood beside in the line. The lesson was aimed at everyone watching. The army you belonged to could kill you more reliably and more horribly than the people you were sent to fight, and it would do so to make a point about what running cost. A soldier doing the grim arithmetic found that the safest direction, strange as it sounds, was forward into the enemy. Money and reputation explain a great deal, but we haven't yet reached the deepest part of this. A man can be bought, and a man can be shamed, and still some part of him will fight to stay alive when the moment comes. To get a man to walk to his own death, you have to reach past his body and social reputation and work on his soul. The cultures that asked the most of their fighters all did the same thing. They built an afterlife that paid out for dying well. Start with the Norse because they were the most explicit about it. A man who died with a weapon in his hand could be taken to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, to feast and fight until the end of the world. The death that earned this had to come in battle. A man who died old in his bed, of sickness or simple age, met what they called a straw death, and it carried a quiet contempt. The whole reward structure pointed in one direction. The worst thing was to die safe, and the best thing was to die fighting. A young man raised inside that belief grew up understanding exactly which end he should want. Christianity ran on a different system, and during the Crusades it produced one of the most powerful spiritual incentives ever offered to a soldier. At the Council of Clermont in 1095, Pope Urban II preached the First Crusade and told the men who would go what their death would buy. All who die, by the way, whether by land or by sea or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God with which I am invested. Think about what that promised. For the medieval Christian men hearing Urban speak, hell pressed close, as real as the road outside the door, and the weight of a lifetime's sins was a genuine terror. Urban was offering to erase all of it in a single stroke. Die on this journey and you go straight to God, clean. Death in battle became the safest possible route to heaven, and for many men that was the most rational bargain anyone had ever put in front of them. There was another layer to this that also touched the act of combat itself. Medieval people widely held that God decided the outcome of a fight, that the winner won because heaven willed it. Trial by combat ran on this logic. The survivor was understood to have been vindicated by God himself. Follow the belief to its edge and you find something brutal. To turn and flee was to announce in front of everyone that God had withdrawn his favor from you. The running man was confessing to a hidden rot in his own soul, some corruption serious enough that heaven had abandoned him. Standing your ground was a statement about standing with God, and flight was a public verdict against you that no one could take back. States learned to manufacture this whole way of seeing the world, and they started early. Sparta is the clearest case. Spartan boys were taken from their homes as children and put through the agoge, a training system that spent years grinding self-sacrifice into them until it felt like the highest and most beautiful thing a life could contain. The results reached even into the love of a mother for her son. Plutarch records one of them handing her boy a shield as he left for war. Another Spartan mother, handing her son his shield, exhorted him saying, "Son, either die with this or upon this." A mother telling her son to come back with his shield or on it. Carried on it meant carried home dead. A Spartan who threw away his heavy shield to run faster committed the act they called ripsospia, the deepest disgrace available to him. The conditioning had gone so deep that his own mother would rather receive his corpse than greet him alive and shieldless. Sparta had built a society where a mother's love itself had been shaped into a weapon for the state. Everything described so far has quietly stopped being true for us. Today, that kind of total psychological conditioning feels not just distant, but entirely alien, and the reason is not as simple as we got wiser. The world that priced those decisions came apart, and a new one assembled in its place with a different set of incentives. The Enlightenment moved the center of gravity from the group to the single person. The individual became the unit that mattered, with rights that belonged to him alone and a life that was his own to make. This was a genuine gain, and we're right to value it. It also quietly dissolved the logic that had made the shield wall make sense. Once a person's own life and its fulfillment sat at the top of the scale, the man who throws that life away for the collective starts to look like a victim of something. We read his death as a waste or a manipulation, and we feel sorrow where his own people would have felt pride. Honor shifted in the same motion, and it moved inward. For the men we've been talking about, honor lived entirely outside the self, in the eyes of the community. A man was as good as his neighbors judged him to be, and his own opinion of himself counted for almost nothing against the verdict. We have close to the reverse. We locate a person's worth in their integrity, and whether they stay true to their own conscience, and we admire most the figure who holds that conscience while the whole community turns against him. The man who refuses to fight on principles is one of our heroes. To the warrior in the shield wall, that same man was the lowest thing imaginable, the one who opened the gap and got the people behind him killed. Today we have inverted the scale that man was measured on. Cowardice is still looked down upon, but standing up for what you believe in the face of the crowd is truly honorable. And the last piece that changed the old way of viewing honor applies to just the luckiest of us. For nearly everyone in the developed world, physical survival has been handed off. A thin layer of professional soldiers carries the violence, infrastructure carries the rest, and the connection between staying alive and standing in a line with the men of your village has been cut clean. But the willingness to die for your nation and the men beside you has not fully vanished in modern society. It still burns in the volunteers in our militaries who carry the work for the rest of us, and they know the old bond as well as any village soldier in a shield wall did. What changed is the way we handed that bond to them and walked away from it ourselves. Step outside the safe and wealthy parts of the world, and the older arrangement is still intact. In the war-torn places where ordinary people fight to protect or avenge their families because no professional army stands between them and the enemy, the warrior virtues grew out of exactly that arrangement, where survival demanded them. We dismantled it where we could afford to, and the drive it once served lost its physical outlet for most of us. The courage that once kept a community breathing through the winter became a thing we watch in films, admired from a distance, a tool we handed to someone else to protect us with. Because we have handed off the warrior's tools, most of us also face the end of our lives completely differently, and it runs deeper than medicine. For most of human history, death was constant and close. It took children routinely, it arrived with ordinary illnesses, it sat at the edge of every winter and every birth. A person couldn't plan around it or push it to the far end of a long life, because it might come at any age and usually did. When something cannot be escaped, the only freedom left is in what it means, and so these cultures poured enormous effort into making death mean something. A death could be good or bad, earned or wasted, and that distinction was one of the few powers a person held over the one event no one escapes. We have spent that meaning down to almost nothing, and we did it by succeeding. We pushed death to the far edge of life. Most of us will reach old age, and most of us will die in a bed under medical care, with the event delayed and managed and held off for as long as the machines allow. Death has become an enemy to be fought to the last hour, rather than a coming event to be met well. We almost never see it until it arrives for someone we love, and when it comes, it reads as pure catastrophe, a failure of the system that was supposed to keep it away. This is the trade we made, and it's worth being honest that we got something real for it. We live longer than any people who have ever existed. We're safer in our bodies than the farmers in the shield wall could have dreamed of being. Very few of us will ever have to find out what we would do with a sword in our hand and our family behind us. Of course, this is a good trade, but we gave something up for it that we rarely name. The people of the past, the folks of yore, lived inside a hard and frightening certainty that there was something worth dying for, something so far above their own survival that a man who died for it had not lost his life tragically so much as spent it on the one thing that mattered most: honor. We have traded that certainty for safety and for the right to belong to ourselves. Most of the time the trade feels like the obvious one, but for the men at Maldon, standing over their dead lord Bertnoth, they had something we no longer do. They knew what they would die for, and they were standing on it. If you enjoyed this video, you should check out this video of mine on looks maxing, clavicular, and the culture of narcissism. Also, consider liking the video, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and leaving a comment about your thoughts. I love reading through what you all have to say. Thanks again, until next time.